the Creative Academy, your go-to source for accountability, coaching, and community for writers. I'm Crystal Stranaghan, and today we're chatting with author Susan Juby. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. We have all kinds of questions lined up for you, and many people are curious about how you became your witty self and where you go from there. So maybe if you can start by just introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about what kind of books you write, that would be great.
Sure. So I've published my first book in 2000, and I have 11 books now. So I've been writing for 18 years, or at least getting published for 18 years. And I'm from a small town in northern British Columbia, which is probably one of the secrets to my writerly personality. And so in my experience, growing up in a small town where you're a bit peculiar creates a lot of angst. And so I think that's where a lot of my writing comes from. I'm currently working on a middle grade book. I have 2 books for adults. I have a memoir. I have a number of books for teenagers. So I've done a bunch of different things. And I teach creative writing at Vancouver Island University.
Very cool. Now, I remember reading on your website at one point that your goal was to write one of every kind of book. And I just remember that.
I like.
Every kind of book that you like. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not going to tackle any genres that I dislike.
Okay, so now I'm curious, which are the ones that you like and or have tackled already and want to still tackle? What's on the hit list?
So I have done, I love crime fiction. So I've done a crime story. I've done a YA crime story, and I'm working on an adult crime novel right now. I have done a horse book. I believe strongly in the power of the horsey book. I have done a sort of fantasy sci-fi mashup because I love fantasy and I love sci-fi. And I think that's sort of it for now. I would like to do a horror, but the connective tissue to all of these genres is humor. So I'm a humorist, and so there are different genres, but I always want to see how I can apply my particular voice to the conventions of particular genres. I'm just really interested in sort of that agreement between an audience for a genre and the works that they consume and the writer. And so how we use those conventions and how we play with them and all of that sort of stuff. So that's why I find it fascinating. I also teach a class on genre writing, so where we talk about conventions and how to use your voice in the best possible way inside the parameters of those conventions.
Right. And that's one thing I think that came up actually as we were talking to our students and saying we were going to be chatting with you. What did people want to know? And, one of the things that came up was commenting on how cool and unique and interesting your voice is, and that is the piece that pulls everything together. So that I think is coming through loud and clear in what you're doing, which is awesome. And there were a lot of questions around, okay, but where do you get those kinds of ideas from? So where do they come from?
Well, I thank you for the students for the comments on voice, because voice has always been the most important thing to me in anything that I read. Like, what I want is to open a book and say, oh, this voice, I love it so much, where you fall in love or you're at least intrigued or something. Like, voice is just critical. So voice is my favorite thing. And so where do I come up? So I think, I believe, like a lot of writers, that our first works are quite personal. So my first 3 books were about a girl. Her name is Alice McLeod. She's growing up in a small town, and she's kind of a peculiar individual. And so her voice came from some of the regrets around my own childhood. And so I thought, if I hadn't sold my soul to try to fit in, here's what I might have been like. And so that's where Alice came from. But the more I write, the more wider ranging my interest gets, and the wider, I have no idea where a lot of this stuff comes from. Generally, it comes from some buried trauma in my past, and it could be a really small trauma. The work always comes from, obsessions, traumas, passions, whatever it happens to be. And I'm just really interested in mining, not just the absurd, but the everyday for the absurdity. So all of those things are of great interest to me. So, and maybe too much coffee. I sometimes, I'll write a scene and think, good Lord, where did that come from? I have no idea. But, I think the more you write, the more you access your subconscious and think, they fall into place or they, form themselves. And I often will write something and think, oh, I'm just wildly creative. That's really what's happening here. And then, a week down the road or a year down the road, I look at the scene that I've written and think, oh, now I know where this came from. Is, we have that box on top of all of our experiences. Sometimes it leaks out onto the page.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way of explaining it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like, how do you decide what you're going to do next? Do you have a lot of swirling ideas and then you have to pick something, or do they seem to come in kind of a linear fashion?
It's somewhat linear. So with my first novel, I was a little, I was 27 when I started to write fiction, and I was so thrilled. I didn't even have an idea. What I had was a character, and so I started to write her in diary form, and was just thrilled and amazed every day that anything came out. It just shocked me that I was actually writing something. Um, but the longer I've written, the more ideas I have. So I am fortunate in that I've never run out of ideas. Like I always have something I'd like to do. So at the moment, and it tends to build. And so one of the great pieces of advice I got was that have more than one project on the go at once, even if you're not doing very much with one of them. You make a note here, you make a note there, so that you're like writing it down and making that little commitment to come back to and see if there's real energy in that idea, or if it's got an engine that you can turn on. So at the moment, I'm working on the middle grade. I have an idea for another middle grade. That I'm just putting the little notes down. I'm spending most of the time on the main middle grade, and then I have an adult novel that I've been working on for 2 years that I'm quite committed to, that I'm persistently rewriting and so forth. And I'm working on a couple of other projects. So I like to have a bunch of irons in the fire. And if I get stuck on something, it's easy. You just flip and go, okay, well, I've got my time here. I've got my creative time. For me, it's usually in the morning, but I set aside time for various projects and I schedule them in. And if one is not working, then I just slot the other one in there.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. How do you handle the different age groups and stuff for your content? Like in terms of your crossover readers and stuff, how do you manage that? Because you've got quite a range of topics and age groups, I think.
Well, my experience is that I try to write in a way that's honest and true to the characters, and then the readers either come along or they don't. So for my adult work, I know that teenagers read the adult work, the Woolfield books, the memoir, and for the young adult work, I get some adults writing to me, and they're so funny. They say, "Oh, I know I'm not supposed to read this, but I've read all the way." I think, "Oh, it's just fine. Just go ahead and read the way." Because I think people who write YA sometimes, it's easy to forget that 50% of the YA readership is adult. So I just want them to be interesting, engaging stories and characters, and I don't worry too much about the ages. With the middle grade that I'm working on now, about like an 11-year-old, I am having to be a little bit more, think about, oh, this is a concept that, like how I'm going to handle a concept in a way that is thoughtful and respectful to the young reader and honest to the reality of the situation, emotionally honest, intellectually honest, all the rest of that stuff. So it's a different thing, but I love writing in that age period when, people have, the characters not quite reached teen years, but there's, all of the difficult things of life are starting to dawn and, have to engage with that stuff. So anyway, I'm finding this fascinating.
Nice. You go back to that small town self and see how you do it all.
Yeah, exactly.
Are all of so you said you're humorous, so everything is funny. How was that process applying that to your memoir?
Well, and I don't set out to be funny. I don't think, oh, yeah, I'm just going to be so funny today. I think for people who write humor, you can't really help it. There's a writer, I think his name was Peter DeVries, who said that humorists exude humor the same way a cow makes milk. It's kind of what you do. And, I have, all of my books have very, very serious undertones, but humor is sort of my mode. So I don't actually even understand how it works. Like I know intellectually the components of humor, hyperbole and understatement and all the rest of it, and timing and all that stuff. But I can honestly say I don't set out to do any of that stuff. It's just how the characters interact with the world. And so in my sort of framework, I think that humor for me has been connected to resilience, to undercutting tension, to getting to the reality of things. And there's a kind of intellectual and emotional um, wherewithal that a character needs in order to be funny. Like you can't be funny if you're not kind of there intellectually, and if you're not there emotionally. Like there needs to be a bunch of things going on for a character to have humor in their lives. So, and I also like to have a little bit of a dual perspective in that most of my narrations are first person. And so it's really fun to have the character know certain things and the audience to be able to read in like a little bit more that's happening there. Um, so one of my favorite writers who used to do that was Sue Townsend, where Adrian Mole, especially when he was 13 3/4, he was saying things and we were laughing because they were funny things, but we were also laughing because we know like what's happening outside of Adrian Mole, because of his perceptions being those of a young guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I can see how, as a reader, it's really fun to follow along an author and kind of play in whatever sandbox they're playing in. How does that work from a building a publishing career kind of side of things? Like, like, how does that work? Yes,
Well, I think my work is tied together through humor. So people who like the humor and they're going to follow, I become devoted to funny writers and whatever they do because humor is the thing that ties together. And then there are the writers who move from genre to genre where I just respect what they do. And they're not funny, but some of them are, intermittently funny because they're just good at the different genres. I'm always so thrilled to see what they're going to do with it. So from the perspective of building a publishing career, I hope that ties it together, but it's probably a challenge if you don't write. But it's also a challenge if you write the exact same thing all the time. Like, how interesting is that for a writer? How fresh can you keep it if you don't experiment with plot and genre and all the rest of it? I think more and more writers are dipping into aspects of genre and trying new things. So I don't know. I don't know if I am building my publishing career or just indulging myself, but I don't really want to have a publishing career if it's not stimulating creatively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So the readers might make that choice for me, but I became a writer because I think it's just such a powerful and interesting part of ourselves that we get to share with the world, and not because I'm trying to build a brand or anything like that. Like my connection to storytelling is it's much more intimate than that. So I maybe should use my head a bit more and my whims a bit less, but that's just not how it's going to develop.
Yeah, well, I think part of the power of what you're doing is that it is authentic to you and it fits and it feels right. But from how do you know your next book has a home? Have you been able to find an agent who places them for you, or is it that your same publishing house is looking after that, or how do you do that? How do you get your books homed?
So my first book didn't have an agent. I couldn't find an agent, but I've worked now with the same agent for my second book for almost 20 years now. So we've been together a long time, and she finds homes for my books, even the peculiar books. So I'm grateful for that. And I have worked with the same two publishers for the whole career too. So at the beginning of my career, I worked with a company called Thistledown, who were great. A company based out of Saskatoon. They do kind of edgy and really interesting stuff, and they were really wonderful. And then my work goes between Penguin Random House and HarperCollins. So HarperCollins does my adult work and has done some of my YA. Penguin Random House has done my memoir and my YA. So I have moved back and forth, and I have relationships with both of those companies, and they've been very good to me. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah, it can fall apart at any moment, or maybe not. But I try not to think about those things. What I try to think about is whether or not a story is an important story to tell. Even if it's a humorous story, I try to tell stories that matter especially for the young readers, for their understanding of their lives, what goes on in their lives. And for adult readers, I've always been really interested in this idea that we engage with the issues in the world but nobody needs a break from the grim reality of life these days more than adult readers. Like, it's really, I think, it's a wonderful thing to give everybody a, an escape and some joy and some characters that they can love.
Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of grim realities and adults and the world at large, how do you, when you're looking at your social media self and what to put out there, not put out there, which I know has transitioned over time, does that funny ripple out to there, or kind of how do you manage that presence piece out in the world with what your creative work is, I guess?
Yeah, so I have actually kind of, especially because I've been working on a couple of books I had a new book last year, but I've been writing, that book was finished 3 years ago. So I've just been in a real writing time for the last 2 years. And as I say, I have two books sort of that'll be done close together, I hope. And so while I was writing, I took a, sort of a step back a bit. So I have a Facebook, and I'm always happy to interact with people on Facebook, although I do a lot less of it right now. Really, like a lot of people, I'm thinking about, it's really a force for good in the world. But, I do love Facebook because I can interact with readers. I can interact with other writers. I would never put anything on social media that I wasn't prepared for everybody in the world to read. I think that's really important. And I write serious things. I write political things. I write environmental things, and I write jokes about my dog. And so I have an Instagram account, which is also probably a net deficit for my writing career, in that it's mostly just photos of my dog. Not even good photos. It's like the same photo over and over. That's my specialty. And little photos of my niece, and like awful, terrible, some of the worst food photography you've ever seen. I don't know why I feel compelled to share it. And then I write funny things about that. And I quit Twitter because it was destroying my emotional equilibrium. And I have since gone back on Twitter twice under a fake name, and each time it has destroyed my emotional equilibrium again. So I thought, I'm not sure that social media is really helping anything right now. So I'm just reevaluating it. I'm actually working, like, as a creative person, on my relationship with my phone. In that it is one of the great robbers of attention. I just read this book called How to Break Up with Your Phone, and one of the points she makes is that our attention is the most valuable thing we have. And I thought, all this time I spend engaged in this stuff that's not writing, that's time I'm not going to get back. And so some of it might be generative. It might give me ideas or create some angst. But a lot of the times it is a giant waste of my time that, corporations and everybody else are stealing. Or just like trying to get a need met that I should be getting met elsewhere. So I'm trying to get my relationship with technology a little bit sorted. So that's maybe more TMI, but whatever.
No, that's totally on point. You are not alone, I think, in that right now. And it is, as creatives, our job is to generate things, and the whole world is sending things in at us at all times. And the constant, the pull in all the directions, I think, is really hard to.
And the idea that it takes half an hour after you check your phone to get your creative, to get your full focus back. Well, as a person who's supposed to be writing things and deeply immersed in narrative, and I'm looking at all what ding, and so I have downloaded I've got a number of programs on my computer to lock me out of the internet. I've got programs on my phone to lock me out of the internet. I'm trying to work out a schedule. I'm trying to do all of that stuff to try to reclaim my attention, my time, and sort of curate my engagement in a way that, because I thought, God, I could have written 5 books in the time I've spent looking at dreadful news stories. That, for me, it's right now, it's the news is the thing. And I'm also trying to, do that mindful thing about, well, is there anything you could do about this? And if there's not, maybe you could find something you can do something about, and, try to allocate your time in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I'm always curious about, I am obsessed with habits and patterns and productivity and all that kind of stuff. So I like to ask people, what does your typical day in the life of Susan look like? What are some of the pieces that you've slotted in to build a writing lifestyle around you?
Right. So I wonder if I have one of my notes near me. So what I do is I got that advice by Margaret Atwood that probably occurred years ago is like, do you put your writing on your daily list? Like I'm addicted to daily lists, and I'm working here in my little studio. It's got 2 levels, and have a daily list downstairs by the coffee maker and a daily list upstairs by my computer. And so my fiction shows up on there is usually the first thing. So I often will try to meditate in the morning because I don't find that interrupts like I used to go straight, get out of bed, make coffee, and go right to write. And now I meditate first. I try anyway, and then I have my writing project, and then I walk my dogs, and I teach. So in the months when I'm teaching, things are really tight. So I have things scheduled really carefully about how much time I can spend on everything. And I end up marking until, 11 o'clock every night. And I end up frequently getting up at 5:30 in the morning to get my writing done. So it's a little bit it sounds unpleasant, but you can fit everything in if you're effective. I just need to take a nap in the afternoon. So meditation, get my writing done. I try to do generally, 2-ish pages. I'm happy with that. Sometimes it's a lot more. Sometimes I'm happy if I wrote a paragraph, but it needs to get done. And I'll work on however many projects I'm working on. And then I prep classes. And then as I say, I mark often. I have a shift. I consider it my last shift of the day goes from 9 o'clock at night until 11 o'clock to keep up with my workload. So, that's the life of most writers have other jobs. And right now, that's sort of how I keep myself afloat. And I love teaching. It's I find teaching extremely generative for, I love the students. I like what they're writing, but some of those pieces you have to adjust them. And you need, if you're going to be a half decent writer, you need to have a life. So I try to have things that I'm doing outside of writing, outside of teaching, hobbies, sports, whatever.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for that little glimpse into the life of Susan Juby. Can you tell us where people should find you if they are curious and want more of your books, brand, funny, whatever?
Right. Well, I also have a web series. That sounds grander than it is, even though it doesn't sound grand at all. So if you go to susanjuby.com, there's there's a few videos there, including one called The Writer's Life. There are, I think, 4 tiny episodes. In which you can see me wasting time in the many, many ways that I waste time. It's sort of a joke, but it's also about the writer's life and the many sort of difficulties of the writer's life, money and time wasting and all the rest of it. And there's also a link you can email me at, I think it's Susan Juby website at gmail.com or something like that. I don't know. I just changed my email address. So I think that's it. Go to the website. I can't remember these things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and awesome. you can find my link to my Instagram and look at my horrendous food photos.
But the puppies are so cute.
Yeah. Cute.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of that jam-packed schedule to talk to all of us, and excited to read that next book. I may not be middle grade, but I still enjoy a good story. So we'll look forward to hearing about that when it comes out as well. And I will put the link to your website just below this video. So wherever you are watching it out there, you'll be able to see it there.
Great.
So thank you so much. And now everybody back to your writing.
Yeah.
Thank you for being a part of this Creative Academy event. If you're not a member yet, join us today and unlock a wealth of resources, masterclasses, feedback opportunities, and online community events designed to help you reach the next step in your writing journey. No matter what stage you're at, we've got a helping hand to guide you along the way. Check out our free resource room if you'd like to get a taste of how we can help you reach your writing and publishing goals. Thank you for bringing us along on your writing and publishing journey, and Donna, Eileen, and I hope we'll see you around the Creative Academy soon.